And now time to get back into one of our top stories of the day. The latest from Ukraine. From recent Russian attacks, the situation in Zaporizhia, 2 Russian athletes allowed to partake in sport competitions. Ivana Stradner, a research fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, joins me for a discussion. Ivana, great to have you back on the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for a kind invitation.
So our correspondent and host, Don Arlith, is in Odessa, where the Black Sea Security Forum took place. The overwhelming consensus there seems to be, by people close to President Trump, people from the Congress and security experts and so on, that Putin doesn't want peace negotiations. So is there any future to the end of the war in Ukraine? What should happen now to turn the tables?
I would say that Putin has not been into peace negotiations since day one, because the only language that he understands is the language of power, which means that the West should absolutely not fall for the games to try to again have million conversations and meetings with Putin, trying to convince him to stop the war. Instead, there are different ways. Number one, to really ramp up and impose more sanctions on Russia. And the second, even more important point is to provide Ukraine with enough weapons and offensive weapons to put Russia on the defensive so Putin can actually stop the war. I have to admit, as someone who has been tracking this war for a very long time, I was absolutely surprised since day one, people in Washington, D.C. believing that one more round of negotiations, trying to give Putin whatever he wants just to stop the war, that it didn't work. And it absolutely didn't work, because Putin is not only at war with Ukraine, he's absolutely at war with the West, trying to, what he likes to call it, to recreate a multipolar world and to portray Russia as a great power. So absolutely what you just mentioned, we should not fall for those tricks about negotiations, even though they will be on the horizon. I have no doubt that Putin will try to initiate another round of negotiations.
With the situation in the Strait of Hormuz, with the situation in the Middle East, it seems to be the case, because you mentioned sanctions and you mentioned arming Ukraine, that imposing sanctions instead of reversing them is going to be quite a challenge as of now. But when it comes to arming Ukraine, we've heard that President Volodymyr Zelensky issued a letter to the White House speaking about the urgent need of deploying more air defense for Ukraine, especially now with what we've heard from Sergei Lavrov. And U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth told reporters on May 30th that the United States, quote, will find a way to help Ukraine defend itself. What do you think could be the outcome of such statements? I mean, is the U.S. going to be able to muster up enough to be able to help Ukraine while also being involved in the Middle East? Because that's been a concern as well.
Look, 2 things. Bad news make news. And I've been hearing for a very long time that the United States would abandon Ukraine. And as I said multiple times on your show, it will not happen, because the United States absolutely understands that the war in Ukraine, it's not only about Ukraine. Russia, China, and Iran are working together as what at FDD we like to call it, as an axis of aggressors, to also challenge the United States. So also what's happening in Iran, it's very much linked to Russia. So that's precisely what, why I think this administration in Washington, D.C. More broadly is more than happy to help Ukraine in the coming weeks and months, because I have no doubt that Putin is really struggling militarily on the battlefield, no matter what he says. And he has been also trying to use that narrative here in Washington, D.C. to portray Russia as a victor, so nobody likes a loser. So with an idea that the United States eventually, support the most pragmatic option. But we already know that Russia is struggling on the battlefield. Second thing, we already see in Russia that Putin has also domestic issues. So I'm not saying, that some revolution is on the horizon, but he's definitely economically struggling domestically, and people are growing more and more discontent with what's happening. Not only because, they're against the war itself, but rather because he's not winning, and actually it's also impacting the economy. So having said that, we also have another actor over there, which is China, and we already know how China has been using this conflict to make sure that we deplete our resources in a potential, long-term potential war, against China. And the fourth pillar that I think it's extremely important to note, Putin has recently changed the law, basically trying to also provide like a legal justification for protecting Russian speakers outside of Russia. And that's another way to pressure the West with the potential hybrid warfare activities in the Baltics against Poland and elsewhere.
Ivana, we've also heard about a drone attack on Zaporizhia nuclear power plant and Russia, Ukrainian power plant that is being currently occupied by Russia, as I found myself as well, and I spoke about it during my time in Chernobyl. Do you think that this is yet another provocation? Because Moscow says it was a Ukrainian drone. On the other hand, we have Ukraine saying, no, this was not our drone. So is it possible that this is yet another Russian provocation?
I would not be surprised that this is absolutely typical, Putin's playbook to escalate the war and to threaten with nuclear escalation. We already know how he has been threatening with nukes in the past. He tested, nukes. He recently was threatening, with more anti-ballistic missiles. So he understands very well that the West absolutely fears any nuclear provocation. And given that we recently marked the Chernobyl anniversary, that also played a very important part in Putin's psychological war. The good news is, that I think the West is, Western policymakers are not afraid of Putin's psychological operations related to nukes anymore. So we should absolutely not fall for such threats. And yet, in the case of any similar threats, that's precisely why the West has to act united, especially with the leadership of the United States, and provide Ukraine with the weapons that Kiev needs to put Russia on the defensive. If not, for purely altruistic reasons, but also even more importantly for the Western security.
Very quickly, because our time unfortunately is coming to an end, but Russian and Belarusian athletes seem to be back in the cool club, taking part in sports competitions to a point where Ukrainian athletes have to stand on the podium with them and listen to their anthem. In what world does an international sports organization where values and fairness should be paramount allow countries that violate, attack, and kill people to take part in a competition?
You're absolutely right. This is unacceptable, and we already saw even the Olympic Committee, with similar statements. So, providing a platform for Putin's war machinery and people, to support such actions, it is absolutely unacceptable. But I'm not surprised, unfortunately. So, this is really past time also for Western sports initiatives and organizations. To stand up and to have some moral compass.
Thank you so much. Ivana Stradner, Research Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, was my guest. Ivana, thank you again.
Thank you very much for a kind invitation.
And so this would be all the latest news for now here on World News Tonight. I'm Klaudia Czerwińska. Thank you for joining and have a very good night.